And I want to talk to you a little bit about that in the time that we have. I want to put a face on this issue if I can. And I want to start off by telling you the most powerful thing I do in the 30-plus years I've been doing this work is just tell my own story. Because people, all the facts and figures don't mean much to people, but when you can put a face on the issue, people are able to relate to the kid they might have elected class president in high school. I was on an airplane, just to frame this for you. I was, when Ray and I lived in Atlanta, I was on an airplane one time, having just finished 2 days of training. I was exhausted. And I sat next to a man who, in a brief period of time, told me that he was a fundamentalist Christian businessman. And he was heading back to Atlanta. You know how on an airplane sometimes you talk to people and they often begin the discussion by saying, are you going to work or are you heading home? So I said I was heading home, so was he. And I liked the man's music. He seemed like a nice guy, eye contact, smiling, you know. But his words were kind of scary to me. He was this fundamentalist Christian businessman who is going to be speaking in Florida to 2,500 fundamentalist Christians the following week about moral issues in the workplace. And his wife was a member of Concerned Women for America, which is this organization that has as one of its goals opposing gay civil rights. And he had received one of President Bush's 1,000 Point of Light Award, and he had been featured in Inc. and Fortune magazines as this big fundamentalist Christian business person. And he said, enough about me, how about you? He said, are you married, and what do you do for a living? Now, I want you to know that there was a time in my life in which I would not have responded honestly to him. I would have said something like, I'm single and a diversity trainer. It wasn't a lie. Legally, I was single, and legally, I'm a diversity trainer. I wouldn't initially have spoken to him because I was afraid of his disapproval. This is years ago when I first came out. I was so hungry for people's approval because I didn't approve myself. See, I had, you know, we talked about homophobia. I had internalized homophobia. You've heard of internalized racism. Well, there's internalized homophobia, too. I hated my feelings. I didn't want to be gay, but I thought if I'm holy enough and smart enough and funny enough and good enough at everything I do, then people will accept me for who I am. That was my modus operandi in the beginning of my journey after coming out. So I wouldn't have talked to him initially because I was afraid of his disapproval. Then I got to a point in my life, and I know you know some gay people, and you know some black people, and you know some women, and you know some Latinos and Asians and others who are in this category, where the world was divided between us and them as far as I was concerned. If you looked like me and felt like me, you were an us, and everybody else was a them. You were the enemy. And it's a naive, restrictive political position to go through, but you have to go through it. It's called a pride stage. That's where, as a gay person, you buy all of Katie Lang and Melissa Etheridge's music, right? You go to gay resorts for vacation and gay restaurants, and you want to just be surrounded by gay people because you don't trust heterosexuals, right? You think as soon as you give them a chance, as soon as you give them an opening, they're going to talk about Genesis 19, Leviticus 18:22, and Romans 1:26, and that's going to be the menu of the afternoon, right? And I thought, so I'm not even going to give them a chance, right? But I found in that stage that I kept bumping up against remarkable heterosexual people who defied my stereotype of what the average heterosexual person was going to be. I was on an airplane one time, and a nun was sitting next to me, and the Vatican had recently issued some unflattering statements about gay people, so I pulled out a copy of my book on being gay and put it on the little table, you know, in front of me, and thought, you know, let's be a prop this whole trip. So she has, you know, why should I be uncomfortable? Let her be uncomfortable. So, you know, I know it's very immature, but that was the stage that I was at the time. I had to go through this phase. So I'm sitting there with the book, and I don't pick it up, you know, I just leave it there. And so at the end of the trip, I put my book in my briefcase, and I get up to go, and she taps me on the shoulder and passes me a note that says, "God bless you, I support what you're doing." Well, I felt this big, because I could have had this wonderful conversation with this heterosexual ally who I dismissed based on my heterophobia, right? Right? Because it works both ways, right? So, and I had other remarkable experiences like that, so I thought when this fundamentalist Christian asked me this question, I was going to answer honestly. So I said, Ray and I have been together for X number of years. I think at the time it was around 18. And I said, and I do training on gay issues in corporate America and on university campuses. Now, I am sure that there was a moment of pause for him, of all the seats in the plane that I have to sit in, because I was thinking the same thing. But, if you were the flight attendant and you knew what was going on, you would look at this and think, oh my goodness, isn't this an interesting cultural experiment, right? Two people who the culture would say are on different sides of a chasm that has never been bridged, effectively. And, but in order to bridge a chasm, you know that you have to build a bridge from both sides. You can't build a bridge from one side over a chasm that big, right? So he said to me, well, Brian, why would they have you do this? Why would they have you come in and do trainings in corporations? I don't understand the work premise of that. And I said, well, imagine if you were gay and you showed up for work and you were in the closet and somebody had left on your workstation an anonymous biblical quote, Leviticus 18:22, a man shall not lie with a man as with a woman, such as an abomination. I think he was impressed with my knowledge of Leviticus. And he said, well, that would be very inappropriate. And I said, why? He said, because one, it would be disruptive to the workplace. I said, yes. How much work would you get done that day if you were the gay person? He said, I wouldn't get any work done. He said, I'd be thinking all day about, who left that in my work area. I said, that's exactly why they have me come in, is that most companies have policies that prohibit such behavior, but people generally don't understand the impact of the behavior, so I come in and try to help people understand the impact. He said, well, what do you do in this workshop? And I told him a variety of things that I do. And I said, but I tell people my story. He said, well, why don't you tell me your story? And I said, seriously? He said, yes, I don't know any gay people. He said, my wife and I write checks to groups that oppose people like you, but I don't know anybody who's gay. And he said, now that we're sitting here, why don't we talk? So now I had more time than I have with you. I had, a couple-hour flight with him at that time. So I'm going to give you a Reader's Digest version. I told you middle child of 7. There were 2 secrets I had when I was a kid, if you had been my friends. The one secret that I would have never told you was that I've always known that I had same-sex feelings. This did not occur to me at 18. In fact, my girlfriend, I always had girlfriends, incidentally. I had a girlfriend from kindergarten all the way through my junior year in college. Not the same person, but, I always had girlfriends. And, and all along you said you're going to get married because that's what you did. I mean, any of you near my age remember that almost every show on television was a sitcom about family. You had Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best and Ozzie and Harriet. I mean, I know some of you saw some of this on the History Channel, but for me, this was the model that you get married and you have kids, and so it didn't occur to me that that wouldn't happen to me unless, of course, I became a priest, which was a far more attractive thing for me. Because the second thing that I wouldn't have told you when we were friends as a child was what I wanted to be when I grew up. Remember when you were a child knowing what you wanted to be? I mean, some of you. I don't know if you became it or not, but I wanted to be a saint. But you don't tell your friends you want to be a saint because they won't play with you anymore. Now, let's have St. Brian to dinner. Won't he be fun? When I say that I wanted to be a saint, I don't mean anything other than I wanted to be God's best friend. I wanted the assurance that when I died, I was going to go straight to heaven and God was going to be very glad to have me back. That was my fantasy. And I was a really good kid. I was one of those very polite, respectful, doesn't swear, goes to Mass every day, to confession every Saturday kids. I used to go to confession in the Catholic Church. You go to confession very young. I mean, when I started, you actually went to confession in first grade. And so you're only 7, see? And so I would say, Mom, I need to go to confession. She said, honey, we've been going every Saturday for the last month. We're not going to go this Saturday. No, Mom, I need it. Brian, you are 7. What are you doing? Well, I wasn't doing anything, but I loved to go to confession, you know, because it was a sacrament, and I was there, and I loved the smell of the church with the incense and the candles, and I loved going to the box, and I used to make sins up, and which I got away with for a while until the priest recognized my voice. You know, I said, I missed Mass on Sunday. He said, Brian, I saw you. Oops. I said, well, I lied. Yes, you did, and we'll forgive you for that. Okay. So how does this kid who wants to be a saint, who becomes aware at an early age that he is attracted to men, how do you bring those two things together? Well, initially it's not hard because you have to remember the times have changed a lot. The volume on this issue has really gotten intense. When I was a kid, you know, you didn't have preachers on television talking about this issue. There weren't mailings on this issue when I was a kid. This was, you know, the 1950s. So you heard words like fairy, and you could hear homo, but you weren't real clear about what it was, and most of your friends didn't really know what it was. And so I didn't get bombarded at a really early age with the negative stuff, but it started to creep in as I started to go through puberty, and in high school it got pretty intense, especially in an all-boys school. And as I got older, it became clearer to me that marrying my girlfriend from kindergarten or 5th grade or 8th grade was probably going to be difficult, because in order to marry them, you have to have feelings of attraction for them. And I saw my friends dating, my male friends dating women in high school that they really were enthusiastic about. You know, you'd sit around and listen to them talk. And you could tell the excitement that they had in their voice about the date and what happened at the end of the date, you know. And I knew that I didn't relate to any of it. And I was very self-conscious about that, thinking there was something very wrong with me, and that eventually I would outgrow whatever feelings I had, and I would step into this wonderful camaraderie of shared excitement. My father's sex education for my brother and me was Playboy magazines that he left in our desk. We thought he was hiding his magazines from my mother. So we thought, we'll protect him, right? And I was this very popular kid at 14, a line of kids out my room waiting to see these magazines, right? And I'd watch the boys look at the pictures. And when no one was around, I'd look at the pictures, you know, and think, any minute, you know, something exciting is going to happen. I'm going to get it. But it never happened for me. What I found was that if there were any pictures of men in the magazine, even from a movie, you know, review, that's where my excitement was. But none of my friends talked about that, so it became pretty clear to me that I was different, and that it was a difference I shouldn't tell anybody about. It scared me. I was afraid of it and ashamed of it. When I was and I continued to date. Jody and I dated all the way through high school. When I'm a high school senior, the guidance counselor steps into, and I was in the honors class, says to this group of 18-year-old boys, if any of you come into my office and tell me that you've screwed a chick, I'll talk to you. Tell me you're queer, and I'll kick you out of my office. Wow. A man with his master's in guidance and counseling saying he'll kick you out of his office, not tell you to leave, kick you out of his office. So I thought, you're not telling anybody. I wanted to say I have questions. I wanted to say I have doubts, but there was no open door for even that discussion for this 17-year-old boy. And I was sure he was talking about me, even though I was the super achiever, even though I didn't fit people's stereotypes. I was sure he knew, and I was sure he was going to look at me, you know, and wink as if I know. But he didn't. When I graduated from high school, that brother, he was a Christian brother, joined the faculty in unanimously voting me the highest honor the school had to offer. They gave me the John Stewart Christian Leadership Award. And when I got the award, I said to myself, what? They never would have given you this if they knew. Children who are gay, who are told by their parents, and I think you already know this, some of you who either are parents now or will be parents, some of you are going to have gay children. It's not about you. You didn't make them gay. We don't know how it happens, but gay people come from every family dynamic. We do. We come from every family dynamic. So children who are gay say to themselves, when they're told by their parents, I love you, we say, and you don't hear because we say it to ourselves, would you if you knew? I'm so proud of you, son. Would you be if you knew my secret? I love you no matter what, except being a lesbian. And so when I got this award, I thought they never would have given you this if they had known. 8 years later, I came out publicly, and my name was taken off the plaque in the high school. And that's what everyone fears. That's why those of your colleagues who come in on Monday morning and they're in the closet and are asked, how was your weekend, don't answer because they fear their life will change. You won't like them anymore. You won't respect them anymore. Somehow that big bag is going to go, knock them over. Now, I didn't know this because I never heard about this happening at the time. I was told about it later. But the high school track coach was so upset when my name was taken off the plaque, and this is a heterosexual man, that he went out and he had a new one made up and put it back into the plaque. It was taken down again, and he went out and had another one made up. And he made the announcement, I have enough money to keep doing this. And when I went to Detroit a few years ago to do a program for a corporation there, I went to my high school and my name was there, but only because of the track coach. Edmund Burke was an English philosopher, statesperson, who said, in paraphrase, all that must happen for evil to triumph is that good people sit by and do nothing. And this is the question that I want to ask you. Of the 900 boys in the school that I graduated from, 90 of them, we would argue, were homosexual. A larger percentage thought they might be because of being bisexual. Who do you think they might want to go talk to, the guidance counselor or the track coach? Clearly, because it's not our title. It's not mom, dad, manager that makes us approachable. It's our music, isn't it? I left Brother Rice, went to Marquette University in Milwaukee to get my degree in journalism. Jody followed me to Marquette. We dated all of freshman year. At Marquette, I was called the dorm Catholic because I went to Mass every day. I was a lector. I still wanted to be a saint, but my definition has changed. It changed. The first time when I was a little kid, a saint was a perfect person. You could do nothing wrong. And then in high school, the brothers said, a saint is a sinner who tries. And I thought, oh, that works. You know, that offers some room here. At Marquette, I was the dorm Catholic. I went to Mass every day. My minor was theology. My major was journalism. My minor was theology. I started dating a woman that our fraternity had picked as a sweetheart. I loved her. She loved me. But there was never any excitement. I kept hoping for it. You know, I kept thinking, if I have it, maybe it's Jody's fault. You know, we've been dating since 8th grade. She's too much like a sister to me. If I date somebody new that everyone thinks is really sexy, then I'm going to have these feelings. And so Charlene and I dated, and I had no feelings other than love, but no erotic feelings for her. I had strong erotic feelings for others, but who were male, but not for her. So I quit dating end of my junior year and finally tolerated the label that I was homosexual. I graduated from Marquette in 1970 with my degree in journalism with a brand new definition of what a saint is. In one of my theology classes, the priest told the story of the priest who was quizzing the first graders to see if the nun had done a good job teaching them about religion, and said, who can tell me what a saint is? And the little boy in the back of the room was waving his hand wildly, and he said, a saint's that thing in the church that the light shines through. I thought, what a great definition. You know, he was talking about stained glass windows, but what a great definition to be the source of light. Francis of Assisi said, make me a channel of your peace. What a great metaphor, right? So that became my message, my metaphor, and guess what happens? I get hired by the Michigan Catholic, which is the diocesan newspaper of the Archdiocese of Detroit. This is a newspaper that 110,000 Catholics read every week. My parents, my aunts and uncles, my high school teachers, my grade school teachers, and they hired me not only to be a reporter, but a columnist. Every week I'm writing a column aimed at young people with my picture. And the reason they wanted me to be a columnist was because it was the 1970s, and it was a time of enormous national turmoil. I don't know if any of you remember this, but the U.S. was bombing Cambodia. Many of us were protesting the war in Vietnam. Young people were leaving churches in droves because they found organized religion irrelevant. People were boycotting Gallo wine and non-union lettuce and grapes in support of Cesar Chavez. There were civil rights marches and marches for women and marches for gray Panthers, older people. It was an exciting time of change in this culture, and I was involved in every civil rights struggle of my day, and I was a daily communicant, went to Mass every day, so they thought, Brian's perfect as a bridge to bring these young people back to see the church as relevant. You know, we've moved the organ to the side, we've introduced the guitar mass, and now let's bring the young people back. And so my column was very popular, and the church asked me to host a television talk show. I was on television in my early 20s. It wasn't, you know, main station, but it was the church's cable show, and here's this young kid, you know, interviewing people coming back from the missions, and my mom and dad were so proud of me. And Dad called one time and he said, Brian, the chairman of the board, which meant of General Motors, called to say that his wife cried when she read your Mother's Day column. We're proud of you, son. And I said to myself, you know, would you be if you knew? You know, because despite all that I had achieved in terms of respect in Michigan, I was still this very frightened, closeted, shameful man who was struggling to reconcile his sexual orientation with his spiritual beliefs. And I felt like an incredible hypocrite because I was telling you, I was invited to come speak to groups all the time, senior citizen luncheons, father-daughter communion breakfast, and my message was, you must love yourself, right? And the voice would say to me, well, what about you? Do you love yourself? I said, leave me alone. No, you're telling other people to love themselves. You should tell them that you're gay and see what happens. No, if I tell them I'm gay, I'll lose everything. I said, well, then you're a hypocrite. You know? And that's what I felt like. I felt like a hypocrite, and I felt very lonely, and I felt very isolated. And so one day when I was 26, I went to the broom closet of my home, and I drank a bottle of turpentine. And then I went into the bathroom, and I took all the pills in the medicine cabinet. And I sat down in the kitchen of my home and I waited to die. And some of you who are familiar with the Catholic faith might say, Brian, how could you do that? If you commit suicide, you go to hell. I didn't believe it. I believed that once I woke up, I would be in the arms of God, and God would say, welcome home, son. I am so sorry. It was not supposed to be like this. See, I don't think it's supposed to be like this. I think we create hell in each other's lives out of our ignorance. You know, we don't mean to. It's our unconscious incompetence, but we do. You know, we beat each other up out of our fear. And I was so tired of it, and I didn't want to live anymore like that. So I drank the turpentine, took the pills, and then I started thinking about my mother and my father and how it would devastate them to lose me. And you know that I still get letters from people who tell me the exact same stories. I wrote a chapter in my most recent book, which was called Now That I'm Out, What Do I Do? About a young 16-year-old from Roswell, New Mexico. 16 years old. He writes to me on the other side of the country. He says, Brian, every night of the week I look at the .357 pistol in my father's dresser drawer and realize how easy it would be. See, I'm not the one who should be reading this letter. His mom and dad. But he can't because the music's not right. He's afraid to tell them who he is. At any rate, thinking about my folks, I got up quickly, drove myself to the local Catholic hospital, which was the closest one. And they said, McNaught, what are you doing here? Because they knew who I was. I told them what I did. They ran me into the emergency room. They put a tube down my nose and my throat, and they pumped my stomach. And as I sat on that table crying at 26, I promised myself that I was never again going to live my life based on people's images or expectations of me. You know, I love to be loved, and I want to be loved, but if it's based upon you thinking I'm heterosexual, it means nothing to me. I had to find a way to be in this world and grow to my full potential as someone who loved himself. And then surround myself with people who loved and supported me as myself, not who they wanted me to be. And so I went home and I told my mom and my dad, and my mother cried. She said, Brian, the world's going to be awful to you and there's nothing I can do about it to protect you. And Dad said, I think you've got a hormone imbalance and you'll outgrow it. with time, he accepted the reality that I was gay and I was not going to change. I took everyone at work out to lunch one by one. I did it myself. I wanted them to know I was gay. And it was wonderful. I mean, everyone was great until a reporter from the Detroit News called to say she was doing a story on homosexuality and religion and would I consent to be interviewed. Because I had started the Detroit chapter of Dignity, which is a gay Catholic organization. And so I said yes, and the Detroit News had a big story about homosexuality and religion on a Saturday, and on Monday, my newspaper dropped my column. They dropped my column because they had gotten lots of phone calls over the weekend from people who said, if you don't do something about him, we're going to cancel our subscriptions and our advertising. That old political economic muscle that sometimes people want to use to impact the direction of a company. And you know that people have tried to do that with other corporations on this issue too, boycotts called of Disney or American Airlines by people who are trying to stop their support of their gay employees. Fortunately, they have not deterred companies from being supportive on this issue. In 1974, in the midst of this civil rights battle, I went on Dick Gregory's Hunger Fast. Do you know who he is? Dick Gregory is an African-American civil rights activist, and he, in the 1970s, several people, Dr. King and Cesar Chavez, went on Hunger Fast. The reason you go on him is to try to get people's attention, to say this is a serious issue, and I'm going to not eat until I get your attention and hope that you'll do something about it. And so I went on just water. On the 17th day that I was on water, the bishop said, if you will end your fast, we promise you we will work to educate the clergy, which is what I asked for, because I believe in the power of education. You know, I believe that if you give people the opportunity to learn new information, they will grow and they'll get past their fears and they will become allies. And so I ended my fast. I was subsequently fired from my job, but the bishop who fired me many, many years later said, Brian, you were ahead of your time. A lot of us have changed. We knew we weren't doing the right thing when we fired you, but we thank you for doing what you did. And that was 30 years ago. I finished my story, sat on the plane, and the fundamentalist Christian from Cobb County, Georgia, looked at me and he said, Brian, as sure as I'm sitting in this seat, I know that God had you sit next to me. That's the juice that has sort of fueled this educational effort on my part, is the encountering people who you never think you're going to reach, who, when given the opportunity to grow, decide they want to change their music. He said, you know, I can't think about this issue again without remembering you. He said, I didn't know anybody, and now I know you. And I don't want to suggest to you that I think he changed his religious beliefs. People don't do that. But what he did was no longer fear or hate me. And he was never going to talk about me in the same way because he liked me. And the same thing happened for me, right? Because he put a face on the issue for me, didn't he? Somebody says they're fundamentalist Christian, I remember the man on the plane. And so that's what we do in these sessions. We build bridges of mutual understanding with one another, hopefully with the opportunity that when we're done, we go back and pick up that rope. We do so with a little more pride and a little more conviction, a little more understanding the person in front of us and behind us. I thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share this perspective with you. I hope it makes a difference in the journey that you're all making in this company. Thank you.